Hello, and I am so happy to be talking today to an old friend of mine, a fellow upholder, Ramit Sethi. Ramit Sethi is very well known for his best-selling book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and his website of the same name. He is a personal finance expert and entrepreneur, but much more than that, what he's talking about is how to live a rich life. And money is a big part of that, obviously, but there's so much more to it. And I love talking to Ramit because he's so thoughtful, often counterintuitive, and has such interesting things to say about how to really have that rich life that we're all going for. And Ramit is an upholder like I am. And there are not that many of us upholders, so it's always especially fun when we get together. So thank you so much, Ramit.
Thanks for having me. And I did not know that upholders are so rare.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
Does it surprise you?
Yeah, I feel like at least half my friends are upholders.
Okay.
So that may say something.
That may say something. Okay, well, let's get into being an upholder. So one of the things that people often say about us upholders is that they say that we can be rigid. We're not flexible. We get an idea in our head and we want to execute. A, do people tell you that you're rigid? And B, do you ever feel that you are rigid? Do you ever wish that you were less rigid if you are rigid?
Yes, to all of the above.
Oh, really? Okay. So
yeah, I think, of course, I feel more rigid than some people I know. And I'll tell you, I take a lot of pride in my routines. It's become a real point of pride for me because I love designing systems. I wake up and I joke that even if I went blind, I know exactly where the salt and the pepper, everything in the fridge is. And I love that. I just love it. So I find a lot of comfort in that. And I feel that it makes me feel good. And it also helps me perform well. It helps me be really present. Like right now, here I am talking to you. I don't need to worry that my finances I'm overdrafting, or the travel plans we've made for next month. I know that's in motion. So I can really be here with you and for everyone watching.
Well, see, Ramit, I think I absolutely understand what you mean. And I think this is something that we upholders feel, which to me is the motto, discipline is my freedom. That I think other tendencies look at us and they say, you're so chained, you're so trapped, you're so caught in a rut. But to us, it feels like freedom, right?
Yeah.
It feels like power.
Yeah, I think you're right. It reminds me of people who talk about a runner's high, running for a mile. And I never got that. I never got a runner's high. So I'm like, that sounds crazy. And you look miserable. But then I realized, I love spicy food, really spicy food. And if you see me eating habanero chilies or Thai chilies, I mean, I'm dripping in sweat, my head's itching, and I look horrible, but I'm in pure ecstasy. And so I think whatever it may be, whether it is a runner's high or being around your children or grandchildren, or just being at a beautiful dinner outside, we all have something that gives us this feeling. And interestingly, to other people, that feeling may look miserable on the exterior, right? Running for 18 miles, miserable to me, but not to them. And so I think for upholders, systems and discipline, wow, it doesn't actually feel miserable to us at all. By contrast, it actually feels really good, and it's a point of pride for us.
Now, do you ever feel that it does become choking? Sometimes upholders can experience tightening where the rules get too tight and we'll kind of choke. Yeah. Have you ever experienced that in yourself or no?
Yes, I think, and this brings me to the rigid part, which is I only recognize that I'm being rigid or potentially too rigid when I'm contrasted with people who are not as tight or rigid. And I'll give you an example. My wife, she is looser than I am. She's more spontaneous, and she pushes me to just say, what if we just tried that? Yeah, it's not part of our normal routine, but what if we did it? And as an example, we moved from New York. We'd been talking for a long time about moving to California, but I wasn't quite ready. I didn't feel that I had done everything that I wanted to do, that we wanted to do. But finally she said, you know what, we've been talking about it. Why don't we just try it? And if we don't love it, we can come back. And I really loved that approach, which is we're not closing a door forever, but let's just try it. And she was totally right. You know, she made me get out of this systems rigid based approach, which really, if I dig deep, it's, I know the person, I know the grocery store that I like, I know the chicken place that I like, I know my little routine, and I love routines. Her point, we can make new routines. Mm-hmm. Let's do it together. And I think that that helped me become a little bit less rigid about that.
Or maybe you had an idea in your mind of 20 boxes that had to be checked. And she's like, well, maybe you could go when you've only checked 13 of the boxes or something, instead of feeling like I got everything done. Because I know you're very ambitious. You have a lot of things that you're always cooking up and planning. And I can imagine that you were like, well, before I leave New York, I need to close this loop and get this figured out and try this and meet with this team.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Having that checklist of things, which can be really good, but at the same time, it can become a little too much. It can become destructive.
Yes. So you work with a lot of different people. You collaborate. You also lead teams, and you've led a lot of different teams in kind of different configurations over the years. How do you feel like being an upholder as a boss? How is that good? How's that bad? How do you think about it when you're managing people who are of different tendencies? Sounds like you maybe surround yourself with upholders. So maybe you've done that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until we just started talking a few minutes ago, that I've probably naturally surrounded myself both inside of work and outside of work. I don't think I've really grappled with that, but it's a very interesting thing for me to think about. Before I answer your question, can I just ask you something? Do people of a certain tendency tend to surround themselves with other people like that?
Rebels tend to surround themselves with obligers. So if you see a rebel, especially in a pair, if one is a rebel, usually the other person is an obliger. I do think that probably most of us we just get people of our tendency more. Yeah. So I think probably there is kind of an affinity there. But I will say that obligers are the ones that pair up the most. They're the biggest tendency in terms of numbers, and they are kind of the type O. They're the ones that tend to like work well with all three. But I think it's something that we should all be aware of is maybe you don't want to over index too much on your tendency, because that could give you blind spots.
Totally. Well, completely. So I think, in working with people, I think there are two times in life where you discover that you are not the only way to experience the world. The first, in my experience, was college.
Yeah.
And the second is work, the workplace, where you're just brought together necessarily with a very diverse group. And so I remember going to college and I sleep fine, right? I put my head down, I'm asleep. So I thought, sleep, no problem. And same in my family, nobody has any problems with sleep. I go to college, and within the first week, you discover there are certain people who become enraged if there's one sound.
Yeah.
And they can't go back. And I'm like, what's the problem? Just close your eyes. It's no big deal. And you quickly learn, no, that's not true for everybody.
Right.
And so that, and then the workplace. In the workplace, I think I will tell you that I value people who deliver on what they say they're going to deliver. And if they don't, that's a problem. And I'm talking about the quality of the work, the deadline of the work. I don't mind if somebody can't hit every single thing that they say, but I want to know about it. And I become, to me, it's not acceptable if the deadline is a Friday and then Friday at 5 p.m. I hear, oops, I couldn't get that at all. And it's a surprise to me. I don't want to be surprised. So that's number one. And then number two, I would say, on an interesting perspective, I've spent a lot of time leading creative teams. So we create these different programs about money, business, careers, and psychology. And there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. Now, I think there's an inherent tension for an upholder where you want to have structure, process, SOPs, but the creative process doesn't always fit so easily into it. So if you think about Apple, Pixar, or any of the creative greats, you start to say, wow, how do they deliver hit after hit on a schedule there's a lot of magic and process that goes into that. So I started to study that because, if it's just me alone, yeah, maybe I can deliver something magical, but I can't hit any dates at all. Just leave me alone for a couple of years and hopefully I can deliver. Well, when you're working with other people, we have to commit to at least an approximate date because we've got the rest of the teams depending on us. So we've had to, we as a team and I as an individual have had to grapple with this inherent tension of process and creativity and learn how to integrate the two. And I can't say that we are the world's best at it, but we're certainly trying really hard to do that well.
And do you ever get frustrated? So like a questioner might say, yeah, Ramit, you said, we talked about me getting it to you on Friday, but look, I know you're not going to look at this over the weekend. So I just think it makes more sense for me to get it to you on Monday. And I just, why even send you an email? I'll get it to you on Monday. Why do I need to meet this arbitrary deadline of Friday? What would your response to something like that be?
Well, that doesn't happen to me anymore.
Okay.
I never get that anymore. Maybe earlier on in my career, but at this point, leading teams and often teams of teams, the dynamic changes. And so I think by the time somebody's working with me directly, they would know never to send that. And the point behind that is whether or not I'm going to review it over the weekend, we need to be able to depend on each other as a team. And that means that if you say it's going to be in by Friday, it does have to be in on Friday. It may be me reviewing it. It may be somebody who wakes up early Hawaii time and they need to have it Monday morning at 6 a.m. But I think most importantly, in a team, you want to have trust. And I think back to one of my best teams I ever worked with. And I still remember how I felt about it. This was a team in college. We had a group project to prepare. And all of us know working in groups, especially group projects, it can be very dicey.
Yes.
One person who doesn't show up to the last day. Well, this team, I still remember how good everyone was. It was like a symphony working together. That was so beautiful. Every single person took on one piece. It was basically equitably distributed. People spoke up. I want to do this. Let me help with that. Everything was delivered at the time it was committed to. And when we went to present, it was seamless. That the feeling I got.
I know exactly what you're talking.
And two people are looking at us.
I once was working with a team and I heard somebody on the phone talking to somebody else and he goes, "This is the varsity team." And I was like, I so know it. I feel it too.
Yes.
Yes.
So
that feeling of working smoothly without friction. Everyone. Yes.
It's just tight. Now, everyone watching this is listening to the two of us and they're saying, these two people sound like serial killers. What is wrong with them? I don't know what's wrong with us. There's definitely something wrong with us, but we love it. We love it.
And I think with a good team, it could have all four tendencies. I don't think that it's about upholders. I think it's about creating something where everyone can thrive. But the problem with that is sometimes people need different things. I mean, do you ever find either in your personal life or in your work life where maybe you don't need accountability? Like you're sort of like, well, once I decide I'm going to get something done, like I'll just get it done. Like I don't need anybody looking over my shoulder. But other people need more accountability, or maybe they need more reasons. They need more justifications. Do you ever find yourself feeling like, oh, I don't want to waste my time building this stuff in, but I realize like now I kind of have to do it for other people?
Of course. I mean, that is my life now, because working with so many different people, I realize that we all come to the table with different tendencies, different life experiences.
Yeah.
If you're leading a team, you have access to information that others may not.
Yes.
And you have access to maybe the why that others may not.
Yes.
And I'll give you an example. So we recently launched a new program and we're in the midst of building it. And what I did was I sat down and I created a 2 or 3 page vision document. Here's what this is. Here's what it's not. Here are examples of titles that we would use and ones that we would never use. And I explained why. And to me, it felt a bit mechanical, as if I'm kind of like taking a beautiful piece of art and saying, notice the eye line, notice this. But also what I realize is there's going to be lots of different people working on this program over the course of the next 1.5 to 2 years. Some of them I know, some of them I'm never going to have contact with. And so it's not fair to keep it in my head and then expect everybody to magically read it. That's not fair, right? Especially if I accept that this is a visionary program, that I have a vision and that I want it to come to life. Then I need to do my part in documenting what it is, what it's not, what would be magic, what would be out of bounds. And when I did that, I created this document and I shared it around. People were like, great, thanks for sharing that. That clarifies a lot. Off to the races. And so that was an example where I've had to recognize not everybody's going to approach it the same way. And it's actually not fair to expect them to.
And I think especially for questioners, it is important to have the why explained, because you might say, well, because I say so, or, because, or like, you don't have to understand the why of everything because this is a big process and you don't need to concern yourself with all of it. But actually to a questioner, they might be like, well, if I don't understand why I'm doing it, then like, this doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So maybe I need to take a little bit more time and be a little bit more forthcoming, or, take the time to like put it down on paper, like you say. You might be like, this is an unnecessary step, but it's not an unnecessary step, because if other people don't understand the justification. Now, the kind of process that you're talking about for an obliger would work very well, because just by the necessity of many teams doing many steps, there has to be accountability. Because like you say, whether I'm going to read it over the weekend or not, a team member needs to know that it's done at a certain date, or we just can't move forward. So that works well. Now, do you know of whether you've worked with rebels? Have you ever had an issue where somebody sort of like wants to feel it, or kind of wants to do it in their own way, in their own time? And how did you manage that?
That's a difficult one. I think I've worked with some creative folks who are rebels, and earlier on in my career, I didn't understand it. Also, I didn't have the framework because you hadn't written the book yet.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it yet. Yeah. Well, we've known each other a long time.
Yeah. So the creative sometimes tendency to rebel against authority or management or whatever sort of personally rubbed me the wrong way. And I remember commiserating with some of my friends who ran companies, saying like, how do you guys deal with this? It's so frustrating. I think now, having matured a bit in my career, recognizing that, first of all, do you have the right person? And I believe that most people, if you've selected them carefully, that they actually want to do a good job. Most people want to succeed. So let's start there. I think you have to decide, do you think most people are good or bad? Because that profoundly affects the way that you look at the world. I think most people are good, especially if you've selected them carefully. They want to succeed. They want to win. Now, do they see this project in the same way that you do? No, definitely no. And I've acknowledged that. For me, when I'm looking at this project, I'm seeing certain things. I'm seeing how it fits into the business, A creative, let's say a web designer, for example, might say, well, this pixel needs to be perfect, just to be oversimplified. Okay, well, what? And so what I want to do now, third, is to say, well, let's try to bring our vision together. It doesn't mean that our vision has to be exactly the same, because guess what? We're never going to see the world the same way.
Right.
But that's good. I don't need another Ramit. One is enough. Yeah. I need somebody who can bring a different perspective. So let's talk about why you think this pixel needs to be perfect. Okay, great. It matters to you. It's art, etc. Okay, great. Now let's talk about some of the other things that we would need to do in this project. If it were completely up to you and you had a magic wand, how would you prioritize?
Oh, interesting.
So you have to put the work. You have to have people have skin in the game. And so when I ask them, instead of me saying, well, put number 4 to number 1, well, suddenly they have to grapple with it. And a lot of times you'll get a somewhat facile answer. Well, I will just do it all. We just work really hard. Okay, so let's walk through that. This one, how much time do you think that's going to take? This will take 25 hours. This is going to take 15. This will take 10. Okay, so we just had 60 hours of work. Now, how much do you work? And they're going to go, I work 40, 45 hours a week. Okay, so where's the 15 hours coming from? Suddenly the wheels are turning. But you notice this entire process, it's kind of frustrating because you're like, I could have just told you this in the first place.
Right.
But that would be that's not great management. It's not great partnership. So go slow to go fast is a really common question. I have found that when I've developed these great partnerships with people, now at this point in my career where I'm a little bit more mature than I was earlier on, it takes time for us to see it the same way. And conversely, I don't want to come off like I'm just like guiding them to the light, because they might say, hey, Ramit, we can skip this step. I know you don't see any value in it, but let's look at when we come and we redo the website 18 months from now. Because we didn't do this step, it's going to cost us an extra. And this is if they are thinking like me, they're going to put it in dollar values, not time. They're going to say it's going to cost us an extra $60,000. So we can save a week here and pay 60 grand, or we can do it right, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wow. Now they're speaking my language, and now we can get aligned.
Because you've sort of given them you've allowed them to kind of approach it in their own way. And so for someone who's a rebel, well, because the thing is, for me, like for people who are sort of like of your kind of entrepreneur, writer, like of whom I know many of those people are rebels. So it's interesting. There is an affinity like between upholders and rebels, where sometimes they kind of end up in the same place.
That's really
but in a completely different mindset.
Well, okay, so let me tell you something. That's really funny you mentioned it, because I would say over half of the entrepreneurs I know do not invest in the market. Now, do you understand how crazy that is? I have written a best-selling book about investing, and you can make a ton of money, and it's easy, and you spend less than an hour a month. You know what they say? I'm not going to do that. I could make more money in my company. I go, how many companies do you know that are around 50 years later? It's a very small number. So just basic risk management says, why don't you put a little bit of money in the market? And if one day things go bad, and do you know what they say? No, I'm not going to do that. I got my company. I'm like, what is wrong with you? They're so smart in certain parts of their life. Smart. Maybe I shouldn't say smart. They're definitely rebels when it comes to the market. They think they're smarter than the market. And I find it really frustrating.
So you think that these are people who, if you say, this is what you ought to do, this is what everybody says you have to do, they're like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, at least in this regard. And so my solution is, I don't give unsolicited financial advice. That's a big mistake. And I think if you're good at anything, you eventually realize nobody wants to hear it unless they come and ask for it. But I think you make a really good point that you can be an upholder over here, but also a rebel, like many of my entrepreneurial friends who are extremely demanding in their job, and yet they rebel when it comes to sensible investing. What should I tell them? Gretchen, you got any advice for me?
Well, if they are rebels, then you might say, well, yeah, that's exactly what they want you to do. They want you to stay out of the market, because then there's just more money for the rest of us, or whatever. Maybe challenge them.
I'm going to try that.
Yeah. So last question for you. What do you think people get wrong about upholders? Like, is there something that, like, just to give you an example, one thing I think people get wrong about upholders is, and you mentioned this when you were first talking about being an upholder, is I think sometimes people feel like if people are really under stress, it comforts them to kind of lighten things up or maybe take a break. And I see this with upholder children as well as upholder adults. Upholders tend not to be comforted by that. They are more comforted by routines or by following through. So like taking a break from exercise wouldn't make them feel comforted. Sticking to it, that's what makes us feel comforted. So I think that's something that is different about upholders perhaps than from other tendencies. Are there other things where you're like, oh, people don't get my discipline, or people don't get my attitude towards execution?
Like, how am I deeply misunderstood? Yes, this is like my next memoir.
Okay, good. Yes.
Now you must listen. I think what you said is right on. Every person I know who's an upholder has at some point tried to cut corners when things get tough on their process, systems, routines, and they realize that it actually came back to bite them. I know it did for me. And so we've learned that, especially when things get tough, that's when we lean on our systems. It really provides a northern star and a guiding light. I think that people probably see upholders as rigid, which, like we talked about, can be partially true. But they oftentimes see it as like we're slaving away to have to go work out. But quite the opposite. For example, on vacation, oh, why don't you take a day off? We're on vacation. Which is fine. I think you should be able to roll with the punches. If one day you can't get into the gym because you're sick or you're out with your family, okay, I think an upholder should be able to roll with that. However, if you're on a 5-day vacation and you decide, you know what, I'm going to feel good if I get in there for at least a half an hour and do something, that's not somebody waking up going, oh, I got to drag myself out of bed. It's actually like, ooh, cool, I get to do this, and then I get to go out and have a nice brunch with my family. I think there's a difference of understanding in how we experience those things. Just like I would say, running a marathon, that must be really difficult. Oh, God, how do you do so much sweat? And they look at me like, I love this. So we can see the same experience in two totally different ways, and that's okay.
No, I think that's a great metaphor. The marathoner, or like the person with with your sweat, the sweat pouring down, even though you're loving what you're eating, is that it can look different from the outside than from the person's experience on the inside. And maybe that's a really important thing to remember for the tendencies, is that we need to have empathy that our experience is not someone else's experience, and our assumption about what their experience may not be what they're actually going through.
I mean, as you're saying this, I feel like this is self-therapy for me, because I always need to be reminded. And I think sometimes, I'll speak for myself, I can be judgmental about like, why don't you do it this way? But hearing you echo back what I'm saying is almost like self-therapy, because it's reminding me to continue working on that empathy, that you may not share the same worldview, and that's okay. That is okay. So I'm gonna watch this video myself and remind myself. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ramit. It's so great to talk to you, as always. And I think people are going to get a lot of insights from what you had to say about being an upholder. So thank you.
Thanks very much.